Hi, so I'm going to do a watercolor wet media on dry paper technique demo. I have my 2 cups of water. I have my selection of brushes, so I have a Kolinsky round, Winsor Noon round, a Winsor Noon round, and also a Winsor Noon filbert. I have my paper towel to dry off my brushes. I also have another filbert, Winsor Noon, and also I have my palette. Now this is gray gouache, but I'll mention that in a bit. And the rest of this is watercolor. And watercolor, you can rehydrate. So what I'm going to start first with is my small filbert and dipping it into only the tip of the brush into water. So I'm hydrating that watercolor right there, and I'm putting it into a bigger palette. Next thing is I'm going to clean off my brush, and then I'm going to dry it off on the paper towel, and then dip my brush into the new clean watercolor again. And there, see how it's fluid and it's a saturated color? So that's perfect. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to load my brush. And you'll see right here on this specific cow, see the watercolor bead? And what I'm going to do is, as I'm blocking in or I'm filling in with the color, you know, I want my pressure to be light. So I'm holding the end of the brush, as you can tell. And I'm pulling that watercolor bead. Going like that. Now see, I like that and it looks fresh. And so then I'm going to go back up here and I'm using the tip of it and I go like that. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to pull this down. We see the watercolor beads and I'm tracing them. And I want to go back in for a little more color. So I'll go there. And I like that shape. Now see, that area was wet and I went on to it with wet paper, and see how I just left it like that. So I just did wet into wet there as well. So you can have control and drop in the color that you want with a wet color that's already down on your paper for wet into wet. So I'm just pulling that watercolor bead. Yep, there it is. And it's fresh and it's not overworked. And I like what's happening there. So I'm just going to go right into here and see how I'm using the tip. And now my fingers are closer in this area down towards the brush, but I still have control and I'm pushing that watercolor bead. Now once this dries, if there's like an area that I don't like, then I can go back in and I can correct. So for now, I like that. So I'm going to clean off this brush. This is going to be my dirty water, and I dry it. And I'm going to show you another technique with wet into wet. So this is another way to do wet into wet, is by wetting your paper. So I'm wetting the hay, my underdrawing of the hay. So that's wet. Now I'm going to hydrate this watercolor raw sienna and burnt sienna. And I'm also gonna put in a little bit of Davies Gray watercolor in there. Okay, see it's saturated color still. Load my brush. And now I'm gonna drop in that color. This is another way to do wet into wet. And see how I'm pulling it? And I'm going around the cow. And again, you know, you can go back into this area and make it darker too if you don't like it once it dries. But that's another way to do wet into wet. And see how I'm pulling this, the watercolor bead? So I'm traveling it across the surface. So there's that. So you saw two ways to do wet into wet. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to clean off this brush and I'm going to mix up another color for this cow. I'm going to do that raw sienna and more burnt sienna. And that's a nice saturated color. Pick that up. This is wet media on dry paper. See the watercolor bead? And see how I'm pushing it plainly? Linear there. Still pushing that bead. See if I can get a little bit of that color. Ooh, I like that. Now this is wet into wet because I already put wet media down there and I'm putting another wet color in there. And see, I like that, so I'm going to leave that be for now. And that's fine right now, and I can develop it further. Okay, so now I'm going to show how to make a gouache wash. So here's gouache right here, Holbein gouache, and it's gray. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to take some of that gouache and I'm going to put it here in that mixing well. So see how it's not thin yet and still a saturated color? So I'm going to clean off my brush, dry it off. Take the tip of my brush, dip it in clean water, and see this is thinner. And see, I could make this wash lighter if I want. So now the body of the gouache is thin. There's that watercolor bead. And so now I am blocking in this gouache wash. So I'm pulling that watercolor bead. And see how I'm just keep pushing the bead, and I'm doing planar, diagonal, planar, horizontal. I'm just blocking in the space, and you can't see the streaks, and I'm traveling with that gouache watercolor bead. I manipulated it to be like watercolor. I thinned out the body of the gouache. Okay, so I continue to do that, and I'll have my wash all blocked in. All right, I'm going to take a picture of this too. And all right, thank you so much.